So, are you a consultant or coach who's trying to figure out how in the world do I influence my clients to buy into change? And are you wondering what does it really take in today's complex environment? Well, you're going to find out on today's episode of the Consulting Matters podcast. And welcome to the Consulting Matters podcast. This is the show for consultants and coaches who are ready to position themselves for the clients and impact and income that they're ready for. I'm your host, Betsy Jordan. I am a business mentor and a brand messaging and positioning strategist. You can find out all the things I do to help my clients make more money through making a bigger difference on my website at www.betsyjordan.com. So, today, what I want to get into is not just like change, not those little incremental changes, the big systemic changes that you know your clients need to make. You see it, you can feel it, but they don't see it and they don't feel it and they don't even know how to navigate it. So, that's a really big challenge for all of us consultants and coaches, right? Well, I brought on an expert today to help us address how do you handle this, but how do you handle it in the complexity of what's going on to today? What on the complexity of what's going on the complexity of what's going on today. So, my guest is Seth Kahan, and he is the leader of visionaryleadership.com. That is his business. And he is an expert and not just like regular, ordinary change, the big changes, systemic changes. And he knows all about how to handle challenges when we're dealing with this very disruptive environment. So, he's got all the information that you're going to want to know about and then some. So, without further ado, welcome to the show, Seth.
Thank you. It's a real treat to be here, Betsy. I'm honored.
So I'm so excited to talk to you about, well, I don't know if I would say excited because, all of the complexity of today I feel is kind of heavy. But before we get into that, I want to really just set some context. So I want to talk a little bit about your background. So I know you have a lot of different types of experiences that led you to becoming the business owner and the thought leader that you are now. So could you just share a little bit about your background and how did you get to where you are now as the author of several books, this expert on innovation, change, and so much more?
Well, I have a degree in mathematics. I love pattern recognition, so patterns are a big part of what I do. But I'm also very much a creative person. I did street theater for 10 years, and I produced and created and performed, directed, all of that. I love theater. I love the arts. Um, uh, let's see, in 1980, I began working at the World Bank. And that was at a time when the World Bank was introducing personal computers. That's how long ago that was. And it was my job to teach 1,100 people how to use personal computers. That was my first big change project because they gave me almost no resources and I had no staff. So I had to figure out how to create a social movement inside the vice presidency where I was working. And I was very successful at that. And one thing led to another. And over 13 years' time, I was doing large scale change at the global scale for the World Bank. And that launched my career. And I left the World Bank in 2002. So that was 23 years ago. And I've been out on my own and I've done many large scale change projects since then.
So, what is it about large scale change that interests you? So, you have that's a very interesting background. Like, so you're true right, left brain type of person. So, you've got the pattern recognition and the scientific side from the math side, but the artistic side, which I would love to talk to you more about your performing thing, but that's not really the topic for today, but that is really interesting to me. But, like, what is it about change and complex change that just was appealing to you?
Well, I want to make the world a better place. I mean, that's the bottom line. And it's hard to do. There's a lot of moving parts. When I was at the World Bank, I developed a deep appreciation for how challenging real change is. I saw really large projects fail and I saw some succeed. And I took a hard look at why that was. And I was able to bring that into my consulting. And really, if I was going to boil it all down, I would say that really large scale change depends on engagement, support, and buy in, not on the quality of the recommendation that you're making, not on the rationality or the ROI or the benefit, but it really boils down to people being involved, people choosing to support it, and then people helping out when it inevitably hits bottlenecks, logjams, and obstacles, because it will. So it's all about the human side in my mind.
So when you decided to leave the World Bank, was it like, okay, I've done all I can do here. I see more opportunities in a lot of other companies. Or was there something else that drove you to make that big transition from a 9 to 5 into your own business?
So I'm not a 9 to 5 person. So I stayed there as long as I could. And I was ready to leave when they gave me a small package. They offered me a small package. They said I had actually my position was funded through the president's discretionary budget for the last few years I was there. And they said we can either regularize you, i.e., turn you into a normal staff position, or we can give you a tiny package, 3 months worth of salary, and you're out of here. And I was ready for the latter. But I had also at that point really created a significant amount of esteem in the market. In fact, I was speaking so much that I was donating the money that I was getting from my keynotes because I couldn't keep it. It was a conflict of interest with my salary. And so I felt like I was ready to have a consultancy that could support my family. And that was challenging. It wasn't easy, especially in the beginning. But I decided that I couldn't go to my grave not having tried, and so I tried, and here I am.
So that's interesting because you're one of those weird unicorns in a good way, where it was like, okay, I kind of feel like this is the right thing for me. And vision drove you, where a lot of people wind up in consulting or coaching, kind of like, I always wanted to be my own boss, but something kind of like happened to kind of push me in that direction. And you just said, okay, I'm already doing this. I'm just going to formalize it and make it make sense in that standpoint. So that's great. Is there any tips that you'd give to people, who do want to make that move? Because there's a lot of people who are listening who are some of them are already starting their own business, but some of them are internal still, and they're still thinking about making that move.
Yeah, so you need to make sure that you have the support that you need. And for me, the support came in three forms. One is that my wife supported me, which was really important. I have a next door neighbor whose wife did not support him when he went out, and he lasted a year. It took us probably 6 or 7 years before my income was stable. It would go way up and way down. As you know, in consulting, it does that. And she was always on my side. In fact, I remember we had a landline. It was a phone with a cord in the wall way back then in 2002. And I remember like waking up saying, I don't have any work. So what did she do? She brought me the phone in bed and she said, call somebody now. And I did, and I got a $50,000 contract. It was kind of one of those amazing moments. But that's her reaction shows where her loyalty was and her desire to see me succeed. So having the support of the person who's closest to you in your life. The second thing was I had $100,000 in the bank, so I had money that could get me through the tough times. And living in Washington D.C. is like living in Alaska. It's very expensive here. So it didn't last long, but it helped. It was something. And I left the World Bank on very good terms. So they were my primary client for 2 years. I could not have stayed with them because they didn't pay me enough to stay, but they paid me enough that I could bridge from being an employee to being a consultant. So three forms of support: personal support, money, and then a client that would help me make the journey.
Yeah, I think that there's something about, like, jumping when you kinda have a net. I had the opposite scenario because I was, like, in the middle of getting a divorce when I really jumped
Oh
into
boy.
my business, but I kinda had that vision, like, I don't wanna go back to corporate, I wanna be home for my kids, and I did invest, though, in the right support in terms of, like, mentoring, and I got somebody to design, like, a great website for me, like, I got, like, that kinda support from that standpoint, but I think it really is like you can't walk into the unknown with nothing underneath you. You have to figure out like what support looks like. And also I'm sure people are thinking like, is your wife available for business development support? Because it seemed like it worked for you. So,
Yeah.
she might have a little side hustle going on here. So
She'd love that, by the way. She's always asking, "Where's my check? Where's my check?"
yeah. Yeah, where's my commission on that one? So let's jump into one of the topic areas I really want to get into with you is around change. So looking at your website, looking at what you're doing here, there's a lot of different words that people use for change. I think you talk to two consultants, you're going to get three definitions for change. And on your website, you talk about like systemic change, you talk about transformation change, you talk about like grand challenges, and
Challenges. Yep.
like you talk about all these things. So let's all get on the same page around like what would you say is change? And is there a difference between change and systemic change slash transformation slash grand challenges? Like, is there a difference or is it just all one and the same, one big process?
There's a big difference between incremental change and transformational change. Incremental change is like continuous improvement. Transformational changes, we want to be doing something different. And when you get into large organizations, all transformational change is got to be systemic or it won't be sustained. A grand challenge is a particular type of change that I coined. And what it means is, now, I didn't coin the term grand challenge, it's been around for about 80 years, but I'm using it to say a grand challenge is a big, bold goal that takes on a socially intractable problem. So, for example, Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation, measurably improving the health of America's 4 million nurses. Nurses are worse off than the average American in every category except for smoking, weight, sleep, all of that stress. So, the American Nurses Association and I work together for the grand challenge, Healthy Nurse, Healthy Nation. So, that's a very particular type of change. When I was inside the World Bank, the first large scale change project I got involved in was called Information Systems Renewal. And we gutted all of the different systems and turned it into one big system. Otherwise, for your business consultants listening, it's known as ERP or Enterprise Resource Planning. But that is not a grand challenge because you're not really taking on an intractable problem in society, but you are radically changing the organization. So if that helps make sense.
Yeah, so like you're saying, if there's like a shift from I'm here, like this is where I have like the butterflies everywhere. Like to me, it's like it's not like I'm just going to become a more successful caterpillar. I'm like totally changing forms and I'm going to do something different. Like that's transformation.
Right.
Is kind of like what I'm gathering from it. But
Yes.
I let me just do a follow-up because I have a lot of, lean consultants that I work with, and they would say that because like lean consulting in so many ways is about like continuous improvement, but if the organization doesn't have patterns of continuous improvement, that could be considered transformation or not.
I think
Like
lean consulting is transformational. I've worked with organizations that have gone through lean, and I've had to integrate with lean consulting before, and I think it is definitely a transformation and a positive one. That's one I support.
so but the essence of what they're trying to create is habits of continuous improvement.
Right, but those habits of continuous improvement are not built into most organizations. You're right about that. So getting to lean is a transformation. Once you're in lean, then you're talking about continuous improvement.
Yeah, I think that that's an important distinction, is that I want to create a type of organization where it's like we can be resilient. Even like if you think about from a coaching standpoint, is like helping leaders become more resilient in that way. But if the leaders just don't have the foundational skill sets, if that's not there. So it's almost like where there's a break, you might create a change that makes this bigger change not necessary, in the long term. But that process of getting it, that's the transformation.
Yeah,
Am I getting that right?
setting yourself up to be a lean organization is a very significant change. There's a lot of learning that has to take place, new behaviors that have to be put in place. And people have to really get it. They have to understand it, and it's challenging to understand. You have to understand it in the context of your business. So I worked with Royal Dutch Shell while they were going through that. So the oil and gas business, and while many of the processes might be the same as say, car manufacturing, that when you actually get into the details of what you're doing, having robots under the sea level processing oil and gas, whatever, it's very different. And so you need people who can work through those elements.
Yeah, so I think that that's a really great example because it really shows like that a lot of things that we do as consultants and coaches, I would say the majority of it is if they're gonna call us in, it's gonna be likely for transformational type of stuff. Because I think on the whole, if it's like incremental kind of change, like they probably have the capabilities, but when they're really dealing with that in between place, I think that that's really where we shine. But I don't know if leaders see that all the time. But let's talk about the roles in transformational change. So you talk a lot on your website and in the work you do is really geared towards the visionary leader and how they're supposed to be leading the organization. Can we get really, really clear on what the leader of change should be doing? And then considering the consultants and coaches is more like the catalyst of change, what should they be doing? Like, how does this partnership work? Who does what? And what actually creates the transformational change? You mentioned something about empowerment, and I forgot the rest of what you said, and I want to go back to what you said before because you started painting this picture, and I just want to go back to that too.
So for most of the work that I have done in the past, I have been a consultant and an advisor, right? So it's been my job to coach the leader and to be involved in the execution of the change, and then to troubleshoot, to float around in the different elements of change and provide support. maybe to architect the change, to talk about what's the communication strategy, what's the engagement strategy, how is it going to roll out, what processes is it going to hit first, and how do we deal with trouble when it arises, things like that. But just recently, I'm winding up 4 years as the leader of a national change initiative. I was called in by the Huntsman Mental Health Institute because they wanted to eliminate the stigma around mental health and substance use disorders on a national scale. And I gave them a year of pro bono time because I think it's a very good cause. And then they asked me if I wanted to lead the initiative. And I had never done that before. And I said yes. I said yes for personal reasons because my mother developed schizophrenia when I was 10 years old. And I have suffered from anxiety myself since my 40s. And so I feel like, I'm a high operating anxious person. I went through this horrific experience with my family of origin, and I want to see everybody who wants to get treated for mental health or substance use disorders get that treatment. And I don't want the stigma to stand in the way. So I said yes. So now here I am 4 years, and I was the leader. So I was working, interfacing with the executive directors of both the American Psychiatric and American Psychological Association, with NAMI, the National Alliance for the Mental. I always forget what NAMI stands for. National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, I think. The Carter Center, the Vice President of Mental Health, all of these organizations, and so I had a chance to see firsthand the difference between advising and leading. The leaders need to understand and be able to go to all different levels because you never know where their leadership is needed. They don't have to understand the nitty gritty details of every role, but they have to be willing to learn them when they're called to. All right, so they can't just kind of float up in the rarefied air and make their decisions. They have to be excellent at communication. They have to oversee communication. They have to represent the change in a variety of situations. So these are things that leaders have to do. And of course, they have to allocate the resources that are required for the change to be successful. But advisors don't. But advisors do need to understand the dynamics. How does something like this roll out? What's the operational plan? What kind of like for example, something that you need to know when you're leading large scale change is communications, training, and support. Those three things together generally will take up 3% of your budget. It's a very small amount, but it's also non-negotiable. So if you have a $100 million change program, you're looking at $3 million for all three of them: communications, training, and support. If you fail to communicate, nobody knows what to do. If you fail to train, they don't know how to do it. And support means that you're there to hold their hand when they're trying to do the right thing and it's not quite working. You must have those three things in place. So that's something that an advisor would need to know. The leader doesn't necessarily need to know that. They need to act on it, but they don't. The advisor kind of brings that into the situation. And there's a million other things like that. And if that helps, I don't know.
So what was it like for you to, like, step into that leadership role, like, after advising for a while? Was it a, like, I really love this type of position, or is it like, "Oh, I'm a fish out of water?" Like, what was that like for you?
I loved it. Yeah, I loved it. So I was highly motivated. I believed in the cause, and that's so this will be, I think it was my seventh grand challenge. So I've done them in all different sectors: finance, nursing, medical ultrasound, earth and space science, and so on. This was in the mental health space. I'm not a subject matter expert in any of those. I'm a process expert. But I had a lot of personal experience in the mental health space because of what my family went through, but it was a data point of one, so I didn't understand the environment. And I was eager to make a difference. And so were the leaders of the other organizations I was contacting. And in fact, many of them I already knew from previous work that I had done. So I was able to call them up, and say, "Hey, Arthur, this is Seth. You really need to get involved in this. Let me tell you why." And I love that. And we got up and running extremely fast. I mean, I came on staff in February of 22. By April of 22, we had 30 leaders of major mental health organizations aligned and ready to meet as our steering team. So just 2 months.
So
Yeah.
I'm starting to hear something underneath what you're saying is, like, you work with associations. So by definition, the association itself is like more of an influence type of entity rather than like a governing entity, like within a singular organization when you're talking about these grand challenges. So it seems like your influence skills to begin with, if you were helping people take on these grand challenges, must have been pretty high to begin with, even before you stepped into the leadership role. Is that
I
accurate?
think that's accurate. I've worked with over 100 associations. Now, I also work in the private sector. So I did two change initiatives at Royal Dutch Shell. I've worked with Prudential Retirement and many smaller companies. And I also work in the government. I worked with the Peace Corps, for example. I worked with the director of the Peace Corps under W when he was the president of the United States, Gaddy Vasquez. And I did several change initiatives with his team. And I've worked in other parts of the government as well. But the associations form the bulk of my, except for my World Bank experience. That was altogether a different thing. That was 13 years of my life. So that carried a lot of weight as well.
But it seems like you're still fulfilling your mission in a much bigger way around I wanna make the world a better place. Like, that's what drives you to be a change agent is still there because it seems like maybe on a conscious or subconscious level, like, the majority of the work you're picking is something that you're like, "I'm igniting an important change that I wanna see in society or in the world in some sort of way."
I have always wanted to do that, and I've leaned heavily in that direction. When I first started, when I left my job in 2002, my marketing plan was you pay me and I'll do the work. That was it because I needed money.
Yeah, that's what a lot of us have. Yeah.
But what I did was that I would lean in that direction every chance I got. So if there was an opportunity to do something, it might be pro bono or it might not pay as much, but it was making the world a better place, I would take it. And then I would market myself as someone who was in that space. And then the end result of that is for the last 7 or 8 years of my life, that's all the work that I do now.
That's amazing. So, can you paint a picture for me about your influence skills? Like, so there's a lot of people who want to lead the types of change efforts that you have, but they don't have the influence skills. They don't know how to get the buy-in. Like you it sounds like you were able to get like those mental health agencies all on board. Talk to me about your influence skills. Where did they come from? How do you develop them? How do you get people to buy in for a change that maybe you see or the client that you're working with sees, but everybody else doesn't see?
So some of that came from my family of origin. So they say when you have go through a trauma, it gives you certain skills, right? That you go through that actually it's like what's that old thing about shamanism? First the demons tear you apart, and then they become your allies. So my mother would have manic depressive attacks. She was hallucinating, and they would come without warning. So I kind of developed this ESP, like how do I know when something's about to happen in my house? And it was intuitive. It was not an intellectual feat, right? So it was like, oh my gut, whatever. And one of the things that has allowed me to do is that when I'm talking to someone, I can generally tell where they are. Like, are they telling me the truth? Are they involved? Are they giving it lip service? Are they checked out? And when I facilitate, and facilitation plays a huge role in what I do. And sometimes, I mean, I've facilitated groups as large as 1,500 people, as well as very small groups. I can read the room really well because I can feel the energy of the room. My street theater helped with that. I did a lot of improvisational theater, and so I developed a real gut level feeling for how do I stay in sync with other dancers. When does the poetry start? That kind of stuff, and I could kind of feel it out. How is the audience with me? I spent a lot of time figuring out how to get the audience engaged in the performance, which is a very challenging thing to do. But I had to read the audience. I had to see what was going to get them. And by the way, the thing that I discovered that really gets an audience involved is when they identify with the performance. When they see performing as part of their identity, they will take action on the stage. But if they do not, if they consider themselves an audience member, then they won't. And so I learned there were different gateways that I could take them through to get them to that point. So those all then showed up for me when I was at the World Bank as really helpful skills in a room. But I've also, I've taken classes in active listening my whole life. I did crisis intervention for a couple of years. That's all about active listening. And so there's been a lot of investment in reading people. And then I developed protocols, and they're all laid out in my books, Getting Change Right and Getting Innovation Right. I reveal it all. But what are the questions that you ask when you're trying to engage somebody? One of the things I'm involved in a large scale change project right now, and it's at the very beginning. And so we're going out and doing a lot of listening. That's the beginning. There's a lot of research that shows people won't change until they've been heard. So we're literally conducting a been heard campaign. And the other thing is that there's very useful information in the listening, especially from skeptics, cynics, people who are apathetic, even people who are hostile. They reveal a lot of information, but in order to get them to divulge that information, they have to feel like you're genuinely interested in what they have to say, not just trying to, turn their objection around so that you can feed them your propaganda. And so those are all elements. So I was in sales for a really long time. I love sales. I think sales is really cool. So all of these things kind of honed my skills in terms of, how do we get someone engaged? How do we get support? How do we get buy-in? Um, I'll just add one little anecdote. One of the projects that really launched my career at the World Bank was knowledge management, and the idea was that what people know is more important than the money we have in the vault, right? So how do we get people to share what they know? And we that project went from 0 to $60 million a year in 2 years. It was disorienting. It went so fast. And towards the end, after we were robust as an initiative, so not in the early days, not when we were in our infant stage trying to walk, but we were robust. We held a meeting that we laughingly called the Enemies of Knowledge Management. And we literally invited the people who wanted to take us down into a regular meeting. And we had them share with us why they wanted to take us down, because we were strong enough to take it at that point. And we learned so much from them that I will never forget that. And I think it's in Getting Change Right where I go through how we did that and what we learned, and I created some processes from it. So letting the people who are against you in when you're robust enough to take it can be extremely valuable in a change initiative.
There's a lot of things that you and I have in common that is beyond the fact that we both went to Indiana University, because, like, I feel like that's the key to the what I would do. I just framed it up differently. Like, I don't like when I was an OD consultant, like, that is how I got an executive team on board. It's like I would listen to every single person, understand the stake. I didn't forget what anybody said, and I knew how to find that through line between what everybody said. And when I was, like, giving feedback or something along those lines, like, I could still remember who said what, and I'd point out. So everybody saw themselves in that change because I deeply listened to them. And I just,
That's
I
excellent. Yeah,
and I'm in the middle of a program where I'm teaching consultants and coaches on how to strategically position themselves for greater impact and really just redoing the discovery meeting. And I call it like pivoting the client from wants to needs. And the only way that you're going to be able to do that is by first doing what I call framing and empathy. It's like you really need to listen so that you could have the permission to influence. Like it all begins with that. And you were really pointing out, like, oh yeah, that was like my coping strategy as a child, is like,
right,
getting into everybody's heads. Like, I
right,
I I get into everybody's heads, and I have to anticipate, like, what's gonna happen because I don't like blind sides, and it
right.
actually became a superpower. So I wonder if there is
Yes,
something about, like, us who are change agents, like, the people who really do wanna see the world at a better place. Like, it's like, we become like these wounded healers, and, like, we have this deep compassion for broken systems, and we have deep compassion for people. And I know that this is like a business podcast, like, we're not psychologists here, but I do wonder if there's something in the fact that if we do care about systemic change, we do care about making the world a better place, like, this is an opportunity for us to almost, like, redeem our past and turn it into something good.
I think so. I think you've hit on a lot. And I think compassion is really important. One of the weaknesses that I see from a lot of change teams when I get called into an organization is that they demonize the people who are against the change. And I don't, right? It's like I know this is another human being doing the best to make the best of their world. This is their best, what you're seeing. And so I want to understand it. I don't want to demonize it. I don't want to frame it as they're against me. Take me into your world. Help me see it through your eyes. And I'll use questions like that, so that I can see, and so much gold comes out of that, you know. And so I think compassion has its place in change in a big way.
And I think that compassion goes for yourself. Like a lot of the clients that I work with, I could tell you like 9 out of 10 intro calls I get are consultants who are in some sort of crossroads and they're having all of this like resistance. Like, it's like, yeah, I want to move forward. And like, but I'm afraid. What about like my money and this and that? And it's like, okay, first off, we have to have compassion over why you're even having those feelings because you're walking into the unknown. Our brains naturally hate the fear. We hate the unknown. You're on this heroic journey, so you need to be nice to yourself. And I wonder if there's something about like, how do I become a better change leader? Is I become more compassionate with my own experiences of resistance. When I'm trying to grow and I'm trying to move into new levels, if I can become more compassionate with myself, maybe when I'm externalizing it and I'm helping with stakeholders and I hear the person is like, just know like that person probably has a fear of the unknown. Resistance is a masked expression of, self-esteem, vulnerability, loss of control. Like it's a masked expression. And it's like, well, if you can give that person more control by helping them feel heard, like that's what wins them over. Like in my experience, when I have like the squawky one, I always think about in my mind, like, it's like I have the parking lot is always like my best friend in every single meeting I ever facilitate with a group. And it's like, I'll just put it on the parking lot or I put it on the flip chart. And if I can stop and attend to that person, it's like, so what I'm hearing you say is this. And they're like, yes. And then I write it on the flip chart. It's like, well, we need to incorporate this. Well, now I just won them over. Now they're super excited about the change because they felt heard. And I wonder sometimes, like, when we look at resistance of change, we look at it as like we have to overcome it. We have to squash it, rather than we need to invite it and bring them along because there's a reason why. And they might have data about the organization that we're not even looking at.
Absolutely. And I love what you said about self-compassion. I think that all compassion starts as self-compassion. And the more work you do on yourself and the more love you can give yourself, especially in the areas where you judge yourself, the better of a change worker you're going to be.
So
Not
it's like
not
in
not
some
easy, but it's important.
So I'm going to pose this to you because people do want to learn influence skills. Like that is a big thing that if you're a consultant or coach, like I want to learn influence skills, but it seems like that, like looking at it as a skill as a tactic rather than something at a deeper heart level that we're talking about, like beginning with a sense of like I want to create allies as we go on a journey, or just a different perspective. Like, can we paint a different picture? Can you paint for the audience a different picture of influence skills and taking it away from this image of like, I need to figure out ways to get people to buy into what I want them to do, to more of an elevated definition of influence skills? I don't know if I could make you do that on the spot, but
Oh,
that's
I
what
thought you did a
I
great
would love
job
for
when you
you to.
said you want to take allies along with you on the journey. That's a great metaphor right there. We're going on a journey. We're going into the future. One of the things that I will often tell people is those of you who choose to become advocates for the change we're doing are going to be the leaders of tomorrow in this organization because you're going to understand this in a way that no one else is. You're getting deep knowledge. This is like graduate school in 2.0 of this organization. And so if you want to be a vice president, if you want to be the CEO, if you want to be a manager, if you want to, whatever your position is, this is one of the best ways that you can get there. And so taking people along on the journey is a wonderful metaphor. I am always trying to ask myself the question, how can I authentically respond to this person? So if somebody says this isn't going to work, and let me tell you why, I'm listening because I want to know why. And then I want to engage with them. If I discover that I cannot access in myself the reason why, I'll give myself permission and I'll just say, intuitively, I'm not quite with you, but I'm not able to articulate why yet. Give me a couple of days and let me come back and we have another conversation. Or if I can access it, then I engage with them. And the engagement is like a true debate. And so it has to be safe to debate. They have to feel like I'm not attacking them. They have to feel like I'm really, really there representing my side. And sometimes they don't want to debate. Sometimes they don't care about me. They just want to tell me what they're saying. So I'm still sifting around for gems. I might not get them on my side, but I want to see what. So there's all of that. And I've learned that you can get people partially on your side. I've had people in big organizations who say, I'll support this part of the change, but not that part. Or I've had people say, I still don't like what you're doing, but I respect you. And I don't think this is an imperialist move on the vice president's part. I don't think you're just looking to take our money. I think you're genuinely trying to do something good for the organization, even though I don't agree with it. And that is better than someone trying to shoot you down, you know?
At least they're talking. I would rather have somebody expressing their displeasure than the superficial compliance. Like I'm pretending I'm buying into it, but I'm gonna like tank you behind the scenes, like that. Like it's like opening up the dialogue is a lot better. So let me pose a different type of change and let me ask you how you'd handle it. So one of the things that I have gotten obsessed of lately, I've been, I went on sabbatical and I got reconnected to all my OD roots. And it's like I got reconnected to like the theory X versus theory Y. And I had this like clarity that we have organizations that talk a lot. Are you familiar with the theory X versus the theory Y that
It's been a long
Douglas?
time, but yes.
Like the theory X is like like, we believe like, that's a management model that, like, people are lazy and they need to be controlled, and then you have this opposing perspective that's, like, theory why, like, people actually do care, like, they'll do good work if they have the right conditions. Actually, you could see our country, it's, like, fighting out these 2 different perspectives. But I started really seeing that, like, as an OD consultant, I was super naive, thinking, like, everybody wanted to operate in the theory why, but really, every organization I was in was, like, really theory X. Like, it's a very solid, rigid, like, and now, like, I have these flashbacks when I was at Disney that, like, my first, like, culture mentor, told me, like, the best way to stand out at Disney is to fit in. Like, there's no, like, like, we're gonna have diversity, but look like everybody else. Like, so all of a sudden, it's like I was an OD team and I was part of the HR team. So all of a sudden, that was, like, in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. So I'm, like, wearing those little scarves around my neck and I'm getting the French manicure, which I still have, from those times because I look like, gotta look like all the HR girls. But this is part of the challenge that we're trying to create these people-centered organizations, these human-centric organizations, these welcoming workplaces when we're in a society that really just pushes the hierarchy. So how do you make the change within an organization when it's so deeply embedded into just like this is how we do, like, it's not even just in an organization, it's how organizations function. So how do you make that kind of shift, where you get people to explore different biases around how I choose to lead, which is different than I'm going to choose to support this initiative that's going to change the worldwide image of mental health into something like less of a stigma. Like this is like more personal, like I've got to change. How do you make that happen?
Well, so feels to me like there's two pieces to that answer. So first up, the first piece is that the organization has to want to change. So when we say the organization, we're talking about the leaders, we're talking about the people who control the budget, we're talking about the influencers. And it has to be in sync with where the world's going. So for example, digitization and AI is where the world's going right now. So if somebody is saying we got to change our culture so that we can take advantage of, the digital world and AI, then that makes sense because that's what's going on in the world. So a lot of times, like when I get brought in to consider a large engagement, I'm also checking the organization out and I'm trying to determine if they've got what it takes to change. Because I don't want to take on an assignment where I'm going to be fighting them tooth and nail. I want to take on an assignment where we're going to win. So there are many organizations that don't want to change, right? When Shell first brought me in to do an initiative called Smart Fields, where they were putting technology down underground to map oil and gas fields, I actually went to Ricevike. I asked Shell to send me to headquarters so that I could meet the person who developed the software and the person who was behind the vision of the software because I wanted to see if it was real. I wanted to see, is this just another, command and control move by an organization, or are they really doing something special here that's going to achieve the ends that they say it's going to achieve? And I was convinced, and so I said, okay, yeah, I'll take on this change initiative. But I was prepared not to be convinced. I didn't know. I was really going to find out. So that's one thing. Does the organization want to change? The second thing I would say is that, excuse me, in many organizations, there are the majority of people are very interested in being compliant and they want to go back to work. I learned about this from an excellent gender bias class that I took. It was developed by the American Geophysical Union, and they are now delivering it to other organizations because it's so good and it's got the data to stand behind it. When we looked at gender bias, so in particular bias against women in the organization, what we learned was that over 90% of the staff of any organization simply want to know, what does compliance mean? What kind of behaviors do you expect from me? And then they want to go back to the work they were doing. They don't want to do the deep dive into, why is this a problem? What's the history of this? What's the toll it's taking on the women of our organization? I mean, you have a little bit of that information, but they're really not that interested. And then there's about 7 or 8% that want that information, but they still don't want to go down the rabbit hole. They still don't want to know the horrors of what gender discrimination does, the havoc that it causes in people's lives, the lives that are destroyed as a result of it. They don't want to know that. It's too much. You can tell me the dynamics, you can help me fill in the blanks. And there's about 2 or 3% who are willing to go down the rabbit hole. And those are the ones who are really going to lead the initiative. They're the ones who are going to understand it from the inside and out. And those numbers are okay. 90%, just tell me what the new behavior is you want me to do. Same thing is true in a large scale change. So when we put fiber optics down underground in oil and gas fields, the vast majority of Shell people just said, how's my job changed? Train me on it. And now let me go back to work. But there was a small segment that said, I want to understand why we're putting this stuff down underground. What's the impact? What are the objectives? What's the ROI on this? And then there was about 2% that said, I want to see how this stuff works. I want to understand it so that if something goes wrong, we know what to do in response. So that changed my expectations on how invested people are in a particular change, because most of the change work I do is about making the world a better place. And the truth is that most people just want to show up at work, do a good job, get kudos, go home to their families. That's the average person, and that's okay.
What I really appreciate what you're saying here, like I think that it sounds like a simple thing, but it seems like it's to me it's a deeper truth. Is it's maybe instead of worrying about how I'm influencing people, is that you can't make someone buy into a change that they don't necessarily want to buy into. Like it's using your discernment to figure out like who's actually ready. And and if you're going into an organization, it's like, do I have critical mass because I want this to be successful and I don't want to be banging my head up against the wall. So like really begin with discernment and then look at discernment as like, to what degree am I really looking for these behaviors to change, or how much motivation needs to change in order to make it happen? And then when you get like those true believers, like, well, unleash them, that, but it's like everybody's not going to be in the same place. It just seems like there's a lot of discernment around this. Like before I take the gig or before I even embark on the change, I just make sure there's readiness where I'm not going to be banging my head up against the wall. Second is I'm going to assess the different people and let their responses be where they are. And I think this still goes back to what we said before, is like just be respectful and compassionate about people. Like you can't create a people-centered organization with an approach that's not genuinely respectful of the people who are going to do the changing. So it just seems like it goes back to what we had said before. If that okay, so let's get on our third topic. Which is really about today. Um, we might be jumping into some world where people are like, "Oh, it's not that bad. It's really great." From my perspective, the world seems a little crazy. What do you think? How do you size up the disruption that's happening today and the impact on all of this type of systemic change when it feels like the headwinds against it is, like things are not politically correct to want DEI and so I'm gonna let you go wherever you wanna go with this question.
Yeah. So I think, if I am running Tylenol, it's one thing, right? Because now I have a major crisis on my hand. But if I am running, the American Association of Physicists in Medicine, I'm in a completely different world. I might have members who have research being cut, and I need to deal with that. But I don't really have to police the actual running of my organization. I have come to see so many CEOs who understand the value of diversity and are unwilling to give it up and are now asking the question, so do we need to name this something else so we can continue to get the value out of it that we've always gotten out of it? And that's certainly heartwarming in this environment. So you really have to know kind of like, where are you on this scale? How close is it hitting you? It's one thing to be in a full-blown crisis. It's another thing to be operating in a very uncertain environment. Um, there's been a lot of research that's been done on dips in the economy and how that's the time to invest in change. That's the time to invest in marketing because the deck's getting reshuffled and you can move up, right? Well, that's what an environment of uncertainty is. We are in one of those right now. It's not an economic depression. It might turn into one soon, but it's not right now. And but yet there's so much uncertainty that many people are hesitating. And this is the time to seize the day. I mean, if you look at the rate at which AI is developing, we know that right at this very moment, the winners and losers of AI are being identified because those who are getting on board now are going to be riding that exponential wave. And those who are waiting are going to be getting left behind by that exponential wave. And so this is the time to act. What does action mean? Well, we could talk to an AI expert about that. And I happen to know some, and there's some very good stuff going on out there. But what I'm saying is that in this time where there's a lot of crosswinds, a lot of uncertainty, that this is a time when you can make significant progress unless you're under attack yourself. If you're running the CDC, if you're running Tylenol, then you have a very different playbook.
Or like where the place that Disney has been in lately, like they're in the crosshairs. Like there's some companies that are in the crosshair where you're not it's not gonna be good. It's not gonna be good either way.
All the
You
major
know,
media outlets, all the major news magazines or channels, all of the large universities, large law firms, they're all in the crosshairs right now, and they have to decide who they want to be. And it's really challenging. It's easy to say, but people are going to look back at this in 10 years, and they're going to judge you by the character that you display right now. And I would like to understand the Disney story. I don't understand it just because I haven't dug into it, and I don't know how much of it's visible yet. But what just happened with Jimmy Kimmel? Clearly, there was a reversing of course, and I'd like to know what those dynamics were. To me, it's even too early to tell whether that's good. I didn't like that they pulled him off. I hated that, but I don't know where the action to put him back on is coming from. So I'm skeptical. I'm waiting to see who's going to pull back the curtain, and so that we can see if they're taking a stand. That could be a very good thing for them.
I
I don't
think
know if
that
they are.
I think with the Disney scenario, so this is where it's like I feel like that there's multiple dynamics. Like my perspective is like I like the goals don't change. It's just the path to achieving those goals like just have like a million more obstacles in the way. Like Disney still has their goals. Like they still want to do a merger. Like part of the reason why they pulled Kimmel in the first place is they had a merger on the table and they needed FCC. But Disney responded to the customers. So this like the customers pitched a fit and staged a boycott and the stock price went, and so but it really tests Disney's values, and I think that that's really the point. Is like, what does this mean? Because Disney might this one's really close to home because of my Disney background. I love Disney so much. Like it was like seeing the crosshairs of Disney. Like that was emotionally hard for me because I wanted to see which way my leaders would go because I remember these leaders to be about like protect the brand at all costs, like protect the magic. And I think why Disney became a bigger issue than maybe other companies who might have been in the same boat is Disney puts out movies like Andor, or TV series like Andor, and Star Wars and Marvel and all the other heroes' journey cartoons that are out there. So it's like it's an archetype breach to not be on the side of like, freedom. Like it doesn't make sense. But other companies could weather that storm. I think this was an archetypal thing, and I think that that's where it's like you have to go back to your core values. Like that's what I would if I were still consulting today and I was talking to leaders, I would still say like I get it and it's challenging, but hold on to your core values because when this passes and it will, your what's going to be left is your reputation. And it's really is time like I like investing in the business is one thing, but protecting your core values, like that's what Jim Collins taught us with the built to last is preserve the core, stimulate progress, but protect the core, protect the values.
Yeah, I like your term archetypal breach. Yeah, I agree with you on that.
Would you say to a consultant who is or coach who wants to work with a leader who's super skittish about investing in the change that they need right now, how would you equip that person? Like I'm going to channel like all my consultants and coaches are listening and they're like, "Oh god, like I want to do the kind of work you're doing, but I how do I convince leaders to do this when they're super skittish with the economy and everything be up and down?" Seth, what would you tell me?
So it's one thing to share an assessment that you have, but I don't believe in convincing leaders. I believe in, you being honest with them. You tell them like, this is how I see it. This is where my compass is with this. But again, they've got to want it. So then I would get into inquiry. So what is it you want? What is it that you're trying to do here? You know, how important is career advancement to you? Because this time is going to come and go. And like you said, your reputation is going to be judged by the actions that you took here. Maybe career advancement's not important. Maybe you're about to retire. Maybe you don't care. How important are demonstrating your values? How important is it to you that you radiate to your subordinates the kind of life that you would like them to live? I work with a gentleman who's the what's his name? He's the at the American Academy of Medical Colleges. He's the what's the honorific title that you give someone after they leave as the CEO or the
Um,
executive director?
that like a professor
Emeritus.
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 Yeah.
Yeah, he's the executive director emeritus. And he's very involved in fighting the stigma around mental health and substance use disorders. It's a personal passion of his. And he has demonstrated it through so many actions. And I asked him once, why is this so important to you? And he said, well, I've suffered from anxiety and depression my whole life. I have this huge list of achievements, and I never shared it. And so I can't imagine how many of my subordinates did not get treatment because they looked at me as an example. And it's now time for me to make that up. I'm going to make that up now. And it's like, so that's something that's running. This gentleman's in his, got to be in his late 70s. This is his legacy. And he wants to make sure that he delivers on that. That's what's important to him. And so that we're going to be able to turn that into behavior. We can turn that into action. But if somebody's not driven by something like that, you may just have to face it. I've worked with so many managers and leaders who are not driven by noble purposes and goals, who are not interested in legacy. They're looking at the next quarter, you know, that's where their focus is. And you're not going to be able to make someone do something like that.
Yeah, you're hitting like my biggest hard lesson from sabbatical that I had to come face to face is like I'm a rose-colored idealist and I have to become a clear-eyed. Like in order to really lead change, you have to become clear-eyed and not have these rosy expectations like that. Everybody would want this. If I believed for years that I thought like, well, if I just like package this just the right way, like these leaders, of course, like they would never make these decisions if they knew it was harming the employees. And then it's like now years later, it's like, oh, they made these decisions and they knew darn well what they were doing. Like they didn't care. And it's like, wow, my heart hurts. Like that sucks. But I think that kind of like is the loop around, with this whole thing. It's like, as you think about like transformational change, it really is going into the unknown. You have to really test to see if people are there and you have to respect their choices, on whether or not they want to go, and you journey with them if they do wanna go, and that's what influence is about, is like some of it's just discernment.
I think of it as equanimity, and I think it is a superpower. When things are flying around you and everybody's buckling, you want to be able to see clearly. And that's what you're describing is that kind of equanimity. So you're not getting swayed by what you might want. You're not getting swayed by lip service. You're actually able to assess what's going on. And I think being able to do that is very valuable, and it's something that people come to respect very quickly. I've been in so many meetings where I've said the thing that nobody was willing to say, and I try and say it with love in my heart, but still got to be said. And then afterwards, people will thank you for it. Oh my God, nobody was willing to say that, but you were. And it's like, for me, it's like, well, it was plain as day, partly because I'm not in your system. I'm coming in as an outsider and I can see it. But it's still, you can feel the peer pressure to sidestep something like that, you know?
Yeah, that's the hard part of our work is, like, speaking truth, speaking truth to power, like, that's to me, that's big part of influence is you have to be willing to go there, but, in a more balanced way. So
And
we've
if
talked
power
about a
bounces back to you that they're not going to hear it, you got to be able to hear that. Right?
yeah,
That's what you were just talking about. Okay, so this person's not going to go there. They're going to make the decision that's going to hurt the organization, and there's nothing I can do about it. So then
and
how do I
and
handle
it's
that?
not and it's not me. Like, I personalized it. Like, I had this horrible client situation where, like, the leaders were making, like, the worst like, it was so bad there were suicides in the workplace. I'm not gonna get into it because that was, like, pretty traumatic, but what was really upsetting, because like, for me, I carried all of these stories, and the leaders didn't care, and I was part of, like, a global community of consultants, and I was talking to them, like, "I'm devastated," and they're like, "Why do you care? You got your paycheck." And I'm like, "What do you mean, why do I care? Like, this is horrible." And I think that that's where the caring has to come into some sort of like, I don't think I should go over there where it's like, "Why do you care?" Like, that was too much of an extreme. I was too much over this other extreme, but it's like caring in the middle. Like I care, but I'm not taking this on. This is not my like fixing this is not my monkeys and it's not my circus. This is your monkey. This is your circus. You have to fix it. I'm just here to hold up the mirror. And if you don't like what you're seeing, it's not that I didn't say it right. It's just you didn't like the mirror.
It's kind of like emerging from the war with your heart intact. That's the goal. It's like you're going to go into battle, you're going to do your very best, but you're not going to sacrifice your own heart.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about a lot of different things as it relates to the journey into a consulting business ownership, and in your case, thought leadership. We talked about what transformation is and how it's really just a complete shift from the past into doing something new. We talked about influence, the role of consultants, the role of leaders in change, and we talked about today. Is there anything else that you want to tell me about just transformational change, systemic change, or about what you do? And I'm just not asking you the right question.
I guess I would just like to end with an encouraging note that if you want to change the world for the better, that you can make that your business. I have. I'm making a very good living at it. And it took me a long time to get here, but it was a steady path for me because I always wanted to do it. And so I just pushed and pushed in that direction anytime I had the opportunity. And I think I want to say to all the solopreneurs out there, all the people who are, living that life, it's a hard life, that you can turn it into a life where you are making a positive difference in your world. And it's the most rewarding thing there is.
I love that. And I know you have a couple books that are on your website that people can buy. Is there other can you give us a little bit of like how people connect with you, what they can purchase, and your website address? If you can give us some of that information, that would be great too.
Sure. So my website is visionaryleadership.com. My email is seth@visionaryleadership.com. Feel free to send me an email and let me know who you are and what you're up to, and if there's anything I can do to support you, I'd be glad to. The books are all on Amazon. I also have a book called Visionary Leadership. It's written for association leaders, but can easily be transposed to any leader. And there's a lot of assessment tools in there. And I have my first book called Building Beehives, Creating Communities that Generate Returns. So I have 4 books, and I'm working on the fifth right now about grand challenges.
What's the book that you said about, like the lessons on leading change? Can you point
Getting
out
change
that's
right. It's
okay,
getting
that's the
change
one.
right. Yep.
That sounds to be like the book that people really should go towards. It sounds like. Is that accurate?
Yeah. From this conversation, definitely.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you all for listening. Like my take on what we talked about today is just it really does go back to basics. Like influence is a challenging kind of experience for any consultant or coach at every time, but it seems like the winning strategy no matter what is to lead with curiosity, lead with compassion and listening deeply to what's going on and try to bring people along as allies is more important. And it's also, to me, in my world, it's about strategic positioning as well. Like making sure that you are positioning yourself to create that business and to create that relationship with your clients to make that type of impact. So, if that is something that you need help with, like feel free to look at my services on my website at www.betsyjordan.com. Jordan's with a Y. I always have to remind everybody because there's a different Betsy Jordan who's out there with an A who gets all my emails and all my website traffic. So anyway, so that is it for today's show. Thank you all for listening, and I will see you all next time.